Hey everyone, and welcome! Today we're going to tackle one of the absolute must-have skills for any iOS developer, and that's building adaptive user interfaces that look incredible on every single Apple device out there. So here's the puzzle we all face, right? You build one single app, but that app has to look perfect on a tiny iPhone SE, a giant iPad Pro, and then you have to think about portrait, landscape. The list just keeps growing. So how in the world do you handle all that without, writing a completely separate app for every device? Okay, let's get into it. The key to cracking this whole thing is realizing it's all about picking the right tool for the right job. Apple's UK Kit actually gives us a fantastic toolbox just for this purpose. And that's really the dream, isn't it? A single code base that's clean and future-proof. So what we're going to do is break down the main strategies UI Kit offers, starting with the simplest one and then leveling up to the most powerful. All right, our first tool, and honestly, the one you're probably going to reach for about 90% of the time, is size classes. Think of this as the foundation for building adaptive layouts, and you can do most of it right in your storyboards. So when is this the perfect tool? Well, you should be thinking about size classes as your go-to for pretty much any layout adjustment. It's your first line of defense against a UI that looks weird on different screens, and the best part is you can often solve problems without writing a single line of code. The real magic here is that you can make some pretty big changes without touching your code. We're talking about adapting entire layouts, setting up different auto layout constraints, or even completely hiding or showing certain views for specific screen sizes, and you do it all visually in Interface Builder. It's just amazing for making quick design changes. At its core, the idea is actually super simple. Instead of worrying about exact pixels for every device, iOS just simplifies things. It describes the space available to your app as either compact or regular for both its width and its height. That's really it. It's an abstraction, so you don't have to think about specific phone models. So, for example, if you're holding an iPhone in portrait mode, it has a compact width. It's narrow, right? But an iPad turned sideways in landscape has a ton of horizontal space, so iOS calls that a regular width. Your app just has to know how to react to these general descriptions, not to hard-coded numbers. But, what happens when just moving things around isn't enough? For those more fundamental changes to your UI's structure or how it behaves, we gotta move past the visual tools and, get our hands dirty with a little bit of code. And this brings up a really important question. When do you actually need to know if the user is on an iPhone or an iPad? This is for those moments when the user experience itself needs to be fundamentally different, not just, rearranged a bit. A perfect example is a master detail view. On a big iPad screen, you can show a list on the left and the content on the right all at once. But on an iPhone, that would be way too cluttered, so it has to be two separate screens. A simple code check, like this if statement looking at the user interface idiom, lets you load completely different views or even XIV files, depending on whether it's an iPad or an iPhone. Now, when you're in the code, there are two main ways to react when things change. Viewable transition is your specialist. It's laser-focused on device rotation, perfect for fine-tuning animations or layouts right as the device turns. But traitCollectionDidChange is much, much broader. It fires for any environment change. Size class, sure, but also things like the user switching from light mode to dark mode. So you gotta pick the right one for what you're trying to listen for. Okay, now it's time for the heavy hitter in our toolbox. This is the solution you pull out when the iPhone and iPad experiences are just worlds apart. They're not even the same ballpark. So when do you take this massive step? You do it when you realize you're not just adapting a UI anymore. You're basically building two completely different user journeys. Think about those really complex productivity apps where the iPad version has a sidebar, a different navigation, maybe even extra features. For apps like that, trying to cram everything into one storyboard becomes an absolute nightmare of conditional constraints and hidden views. It's just a mess to maintain. So the cleanest, most scalable way to handle it is to just stop fighting it and create a totally separate storyboard for each device. And you know what? The code to do this is surprisingly simple. You can see it right here. When your app launches, you just check the device idiom, just like we did before. Then you can use a quick ternary operator to pick the right storyboard file name, main iPad or main iPhone, and then you just load it up. Boom, you get maximum separation and your code stays clean. Okay, so we've looked at 3 different levels of solutions, from simple visual tweaks all the way up to entirely separate UI flows. So let's bring it all home and create a simple blueprint so you know exactly which tool to grab in any situation. And here it is, your adaptive UI cheat sheet. It's pretty straightforward. If you're just making some visual adjustments, stick with size classes and interface builder. It's easy. If you need to load different views or components, that's when you jump into code with a device idiom check. To react to things beyond just rotation, like dark mode, traitCollectionDidChange is your friend. And finally, for those massive, totally distinct apps that live in one codebase, you go with separate storyboards. This right here is the key takeaway. At the end of the day, this is why we put in the effort. Mastering these techniques isn't just about making your app look good today. It's about writing clean, maintainable code and building an app that isn't going to totally break the next time Apple drops a device with the brand new screen size. And that's really the thought I want to leave you with. By building your UI to be adaptive from the very start, you're not just solving today's problems. You're preparing your app for a future you can't even see it. Hope this helped you out.